There were 56 chairs set out for the funeral. Exactly 56. I counted them while everyone else cried. Jessica had insisted on silver-trimmed chairs because they look better in photos, but only 55 were filled. The seat beside her, the one meant for me, stayed empty. She told the usher not to seat me there, said it would complicate things, as if grieving your father while secretly texting your attorney about divorce isn't a complication. I stood in the back, not beside her, not with the family, not even among the distant relatives. I stood by a ficus next to a woman who dated her uncle in the 90s. I gripped the funeral program where my last name was misspelled. No one offered me a tissue. And when she stood to speak about her father, Richard Whitmore, a titan of Texas oil, the man who once said I smelled like drywall, she didn't mention me. Not once. Not in the list of survivors. Not in the thank yous. Not even with a glance. She wore a black silk dress and stilettos sharp enough to puncture anyone's ego. She cried perfectly enough to seem human, not enough to smear her mascara. On her way back to her seat, she leaned in and whispered something to the man sitting in my place. He smirked. I didn't know who he was. I didn't care. Because the story really began after the service. It wasn't the inheritance. Not yet. It was what Jessica did on the way out. She dropped her handkerchief. Deliberately. Right in front of me. I bent to pick it up like an idiot, and that's when I saw it. The corner of a folded document peeking from her clutch. I saw my name. My name. In bold. Next to a case number. And that's when something brutal hit me. She'd filed for divorce before the funeral, before the flowers were ordered, before the eulogy, before she wept over a man who hated me, pretending she still loved me. And 2 days later, she was supposed to inherit $250 million. And 2 days after that, she would walk into our house, hand me a plain white envelope, and say, "Daniel, I choose myself." But the will? Oh, the will had other plans. Plans Jessica didn't see coming. Plans that made her turn pale in a room full of mahogany and legal threats. Plans that, for the first time in years, made me truly angry. I didn't sleep the night before the reading of the will. Not a minute. I lay on the pull-out couch in my cousin's basement, listening to the pipes clatter and wondering whether I should even show up. What was the point? Jessica had already taken everything. Not just the marriage, but the dignity I once had standing beside her. When a woman leaves you before the flowers on her father's grave have even wilted, you stop expecting fairness from the world. But that document, that single flash of bold type with my name, gnawed at me like a hangnail you can't stop picking. Why would Glenn Darby, who called me a lawn ornament, mention me in anything at all? The Whitmore estate sat on a private hill in Greenwich, Connecticut, behind wrought iron gates, where only whispers slipped through. The kind of place where even the breeze smells like money. Unlike the others, I wasn't led through the main entrance, but through a side door usually meant for catering and staff, which was probably poetic in Glenn's eyes. A small group gathered in the study. Deep leather chairs, animal heads on the walls, and a grandfather clock that had probably ticked through 3 world wars. Jessica was already there, legs crossed, in a wet asphalt gray dress. Black had done its duty. She looked at me without anger, without pity, with a blank, transactional calm, like it's someone she once leased a car with. Beside her sat the same man from the funeral. I noticed his shoes, first polished loafers with gold plaques, the kind people wear only when they want to be looked at. I took a seat in the far corner, where the light from the window didn't quite reach. No one greeted me. Not even the attorney, who came in shuffling a thick envelope as if it contained nuclear codes. He cleared his throat and began. As the legal representative of the late Mr. Richard Whitmore, I will now read his last will and testament, witnessed and recorded 2 months before his passing. 2 months. It hit me like a sledgehammer. Richard had updated his will very recently. Family. Before the heart attack, after the last family retreat. I remembered Jessica went alone on that trip. You'd be bored anyway, she'd said, tossing sunscreen into her suitcase. Back then, I believed her. Now I wasn't sure. The lawyer began listing assets: a mansion in Newport, an apartment in Manhattan, a Texas ranch, a house in Aspen, 3 cars, each worth more than my childhood home, paintings by artists whose names I couldn't pronounce, every line read like someone else's fantasy. Then came the distribution. To my daughter, Jessica Elise Whitmore. She tilted her head slightly, like a queen awaiting her crown. I bequeath the sum of $1 million to be managed by the family trust, under the oversight of Mr. Bradley Vaughn. Jessica blinked. Just once. The lawyer didn't flinch. She cleared her throat and asked, "Did you mean 100 million?" Silence fell over the room, the kind that thickens the air. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. "No. 1 million. The remainder of Mr. Whitmore's estate will pass to another beneficiary, as outlined in this letter." He broke the seal on a hand-addressed envelope, pulled out a single page, and began to read, Richard's voice seeming to rise from the paper. "If you're hearing this, Jessica, I'm gone. I've watched you change, not over years, but in weeks. You stopped visiting, unless cameras were involved. You brought that man, the one you thought I wouldn't notice, into my house, and laughed behind my back. I am not a fool. You loved your inheritance more than your father, and so my money will not be your reward." Jessica's mouth opened. No sound came out. Not even a breath. The lawyer went on in a flat tone. "To the man who married my daughter, knowing she would one day despise him. To the man who bore my cruelty with dignity and stayed even when he should have left. To Daniel Thomas Brooks, I leave everything else." I swear time stopped. I forgot how to breathe. Jessica looked at me like antlers had sprouted from my head. The man beside her shot to his feet, as if the chair had turned dangerous. I didn't know what to say. I didn't want this. I just wanted my marriage back. I wanted my cat back. I wanted our Sunday mornings back. But none of that mattered, because now I was the legal heir to a $250 million empire, and the woman who left me was staring at the floor as if it had betrayed her too. I walked out before the paperwork was done. I needed air, distance. I wanted to scream and laugh and sob all at once. She ran after me. I heard her heels scrape across the marble faster than I'd seen her move in years. "Daniel!" she called. But I kept walking, down the drive, past the fountain, through the gates. Because for the first time in my life, I was the one leaving. I walked for over an hour. Not because I had no car, not for drama. Because if I stopped, it felt like I'd explode. The air got heavier. Even the trees lining the estate road seemed to lean in to whisper behind my back. I didn't want the money. I wanted a time machine. I wanted to go back 6 months and shake myself until I noticed all the signs I ignored. I wanted to go back to before Jessica disappeared into her phone, before the new perfume, before the lines like, "You wouldn't understand the world I come from." When I finally reached my cousin's place, I sat on the edge of the pull-out couch, in the same wrinkled shirt, and stared at the plastic plant in the corner. My cousin's kid watched a cartoon where animals flew planes. I barely heard it. All I could hear was Richard's voice, that part of the will. To the man who stayed even when he should have left. I hadn't realized he'd actually seen me, the real me. And now he was gone. I didn't sleep that night either. But this time, it wasn't confusion. It was fear. I wasn't built for this. I didn't know what to do with money that had more zeros than I'd ever seen. My whole life had been coupons, cheap ramen, and budgeting gas until payday. I didn't even know how to talk to lawyers. What do you do with that kind of wealth when last week you couldn't afford the fancy peanut butter? But Jessica knew. She knew exactly what to do. The very next morning, she was waiting outside the warehouse where I worked. Yes, I still showed up. What else was I supposed to do? She leaned against the hood of her BMW like she hadn't shattered my heart and left, like nothing had happened. And the look in her eyes wasn't sorrow, not even desperation. It was hunger, strategic, polished hunger. "We need to talk," she said, pushing her sunglasses into her hair like a courtroom drama lead. "No, we don't," I said, brushing past. But she followed me, right into the building, right past my supervisor. She cornered me near the break room, standing so close I could smell the same vanilla lotion she used when we still shared a bed. For a moment, I almost forgot everything. I almost remembered what it felt like to wake up next to her and think I'd hit the jackpot. Then she said it. "You don't deserve this, Daniel. No apology, no guilt, just that." I stared at her, stunned by the nerve. She looked at me as if I were the unreasonable one. "You think this money is yours?" she went on, lowering her voice. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. He was punishing me, that's all. He always knew how to twist things against me. You're just a symbol, Daniel. This isn't about you." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was the only way to keep my hands from shaking. "A symbol? So I'm not even a real person to you?" She crossed her arms. "You were a mistake that dragged on." That line, I still hear it in my bones. A mistake that dragged on. Before I could say anything, before I could even process how deep it cut. She pulled a thick folder from her bag. Legal documents, highlighted sections, yellow tabs sticking out like angry teeth. "This is a revised proposal," she said, "for division of the estate assets. You don't need all of it. You don't know what to do with it. You'll lose it. Let's be realistic. They'll eat you alive." Is that a threat? It's an offer, Daniel. A chance to walk away with dignity before you embarrass us both. She smiled. Then the same smile she used on store clerks when she wanted to dodge the return policy. I didn't take the folder. I couldn't. My hands clenched into fists at my sides. Not from anger. I wasn't raised to hit or shout. From shame. Because part of me believed her. Part of me thought, she's right. I don't belong in that world. But another part, a quieter, shakier voice, said, maybe I do. Maybe Richard saw something in me Jessica never did. Maybe staying, even when it made me feel invisible, meant something more than weakness. She turned to leave, heels clicking with confidence, the folder still in her hand. "You'll call me," she threw over her shoulder. "You always do." But this time I didn't, because for the first time I had something I'd never had before. Leverage. And Jessica? She wasn't done playing games, but neither was I. By the end of the week, my life felt fake. I was still clocking in at the warehouse, still eating off-brand cereal in a rented basement, and still getting texts from Jessica pretending she was doing me a favor. She didn't beg. Jessica never begged. She negotiated in cold, calculated language. Let's be smart. We can avoid dragging it out. Think about the press. The press? As if the world cared about a guy who once fixed a neighbor's dryer for leftover barbecue. But someone must have been watching, because on Friday, I got a call from one of Richard's estate attorneys. Not the one who read the will a younger man with a tense, unsure voice. He asked if I could come by to review supplemental documents. I said I didn't understand. He said, "It concerns the structure of the inheritance. You'll want to read this in person." The office was in a glass tower downtown, the kind of place I used to pass on my way to cheap lunches, always assuming I didn't belong inside. The The receptionist didn't even look up. I sat on a leather couch that cost more than my first car, sweating through my shirt and trying not to touch anything. In the conference room, they handed me a sealed folder and stepped out, giving me privacy. I opened it slowly. My name was in bold on the first page. I skimmed the lines, barely processing the legal jargon until I reached the section. Addendum. Conditions of inheritance. Turns out Richard wasn't just bitter. He was brilliantly cruel in the most precise, theatrical way. His money didn't simply transfer to me. It came with instructions. A portion of the estate, almost 40, was placed in a time-locked trust in my name. But here was the catch. That portion would not activate unless I remained divorced from Jessica for at least 18 consecutive months. If I resumed a relationship with her, married or not, I'd forfeit that share too. A sanctuary for abandoned dogs. I read the paragraph 3 times, each time with a louder gasp. Richard had literally written a clause that punished me if I ever went back to her. It wasn't just money. It was a trap, a loyalty test from beyond the grave. He attached a note handwritten, scanned, at the end of the folder. Daniel, if you feel the pull back to the cage, remember, you were never her pet. She only knew how to feed you. Don't let her put a leash on you again. R.W. It was insane and oddly poetic. The man who once mocked me for folding his daughter's laundry had posthumously declared me worthy of freedom and fortune. All I had to do was stay away from her. I should have felt grateful, relieved. Instead, I felt sick, because Jessica had come back. She was trying to pull me in again. And now it wasn't just betrayal or heartbreak. It was manipulation, strategy, control. She hadn't changed. She was just cornered. That night, I didn't answer her call. She left a voicemail. I didn't play it. The next morning, I found her sitting in her car outside my cousin's house. Again. Same car, same coat. But this time, no folder. Just her, red-eyed and disheveled, looking almost human. I just want to talk, she said. You always do. She looked down at her hands, then back up. You've read the documents, haven't you? I didn't reply. Her jaw tightened. It's humiliating, Daniel. What he did to me. To us. That clause? It's a joke. It's disgusting. He's laughing at us from the grave. Are you sure he's not just laughing at you? I said without meaning to. It came out colder than I expected. She blinked, the first crack in the armor. I didn't mean to hurt you, she whispered. But I laughed. Short. Tired. Didn't mean to. Jessica, you filed for divorce before his ashes cooled. I was just supposed to roll over while you collected the money and the guy in the blue loafers? She looked like she might cry, but nothing came. And I suddenly realized something horrifying. She couldn't cry. Not because of pride, but because the emotion simply wasn't there. Maybe it never was. Before she left, she tried one last thing. She pulled a photo from her coat pocket. Old back from our early days. A picnic by the lake. Plastic wine glasses, her lying on my chest. She held it between 2 fingers, as if it meant something. I keep this with me, she said. You weren't just a stepping stone, Daniel. But I didn't take the photo. I left it on the porch after she drove away. That night, I looked up the sanctuary mentioned in the clause. It had over 300 rescued dogs. One of them was named Captain Pickles. If I went back to her, Captain Pickles would get my money. I never wanted a pug with a lazy eye to be the symbol of my self-worth. But somehow, in that moment, everything clicked. Jessica wasn't trying to win me back. She was trying to defuse the bomb her father planted. But the clock was already ticking, and this time, I wasn't going to lose. The photo stayed on the porch for 2 days. It rained the first night. A light drizzle, enough to curl the edges and blur my jawline. I thought my cousin's kid had brought it inside, But when I headed to work Monday morning, it was still there, clinging to the wood, its corners warped, as if it had aged 20 years overnight. I picked it up not because I wanted it, but because I needed the reminder. Not of what we had, but of what she gave up. You'd think this is where things cooled down, that Jessica would cut her losses, disappear into some marble-floored mansion, and leave me to swim in unexpected wealth. But you'd be wrong. Jessica was never the type to lose quietly, especially not to someone like me. 3 days later, I got an envelope in the mail. No stamp, just sitting in the box. My name was printed in red on the front, bold, dramatic, theatrical, like someone trying too hard to seem mysterious. Inside, a single sheet of paper. From her? No letterhead, no explanation, just 2 sentences. There are things you don't know, Daniel. You should be careful whom you trust with Richard's secrets. No signature. At first I thought it was a prank. Then I thought it was Jessica's mind game, trying to loosen my grip on the inheritance. But the longer I stared, the more I realized it wasn't her tone. Jessica didn't warn. She demanded. That night I stayed up going through every folder, letter, document the lawyer had given me. I hadn't touched most of it. Honestly, I'd been overwhelmed by the sheer volume of financial jargon. But now I dug in, searching for something, anything, that would explain the message. And I found it. Not on official letterhead, not buried in legalese. It was tucked into an envelope labeled Miscellaneous Correspondence. Inside were printouts from Richard's private server. Most were nothing notes to his assistant, instructions to staff, but one thread caught my eye. Subject: Jessica's request, urgent. I opened it. It was from someone named A. Whitley. The email was short, almost sterile. We have reviewed the request. Document destruction would require written sign-off from all trustees per the original agreement. At this time, only one signature has been received. We will not proceed without the second. At first, I didn't understand document destruction, trustees, but the timestamp was 2 weeks before Richard's death. I scrolled down to the earlier email, and my breath caught. Jessica had requested the removal. No, destruction of a file titled Addendum C, Disqualification Clause. You didn't need a law degree to know what that meant. I printed the emails and called Richard's attorney the next morning. When I told him what I'd found, there was a pause. Not long, just long enough to tell me he hadn't expected me to find it. "Mr. Brooks," he said carefully, "those documents were reviewed after Mr. Whitmore's passing. The clause was deemed valid. As you know, no alterations were made to the will after his final notarized revision." "So she tried to have it removed," I said, mostly to myself. "She made contact, yes. But legally, nothing changed." I hung up and stared at the wall for a long time. Jessica hadn't just left me. She'd known about the clause. She knew what her father had done. And she'd tried to erase it before he died. That photo she dropped off, the visit to my job, the sudden soft voice, the nostalgia, the fake tears. It wasn't just manipulation. It was damage control. That night I got another voicemail from her. She didn't know yet that I'd found the emails, but her voice was tighter now, controlled, but thinner. She was losing ground, and she knew it. "Daniel, please. I know this has been ugly, but you and I both know he did this to hurt me. You're just a pawn. I'm the one who had to live under his rules my whole life. I deserve a piece of it. You can't actually want to punish me like this." I listened twice. Then I saved it. Not because I needed proof, because I wanted to remember exactly who she was when she thought no one was listening. But what Jessica didn't realize, and what Richard probably hoped I'd figure out, was that there were more than emails. There were videos, security footage, archive locks, time-stamped visits to the estate, and one file dated 3 days before he died, titled, Library, July 10th. I didn't even know the estate had a library, but apparently that's where the final twist waited. And Jessica? She had no idea I was about to find it. If you've ever been in a room that was never meant to feel warm, you'll understand what it felt like walking into Richard Whitmore's private library. It took nearly a week of calls, paperwork, and waiting for clearance from the estate manager to get me back on the property. I half expected someone to stop me at the gate and say they'd changed their mind, that I'd been mistaken, that the money wasn't mine after all, and I'd go back to being invisible. But the guards recognized me now, not as Jessica's ex, not as the broken guy who fixed radiators. No. Now I was Mr. Brooks, sole heir to the Whitmore fortune, and apparently even the marble lions by the front door stood a little straighter when you walked in with that title. The library was on the second floor of the West Wing, a place I'd never been allowed when Jessica and I visited. She called it off-limits, something about private archives and family history I wouldn't understand. Now I understood everything. It wasn't about books, it was about control. Because tucked among leather-bound first editions and a globe that probably hadn't spun in 50 years was a drawer behind a false panel. I didn't find it myself. One of the estate staff, an older man named Horace, guided me there. He didn't say much, just handed me a brass key and said, he wanted you to see it. Inside the drawer was a single flash drive in a velvet-lined box, labeled in Richard's handwriting, Library, July 10th. Final record. It felt heavier than it should have, as if it weren't plastic and metal but loaded with everything I'd been too blind to see for years. I watched it alone in the estate study, curtains drawn and doors locked. The file was under 5 minutes. No music. No effects. Just raw footage from a fixed-angle security camera above the fireplace. It showed Jessica. Not crying, not mourning, not even alone. She paced, agitated, phone clutched in one hand, the other cutting the air. She wasn't talking to Richard. He sat behind the desk, motionless, watching. His expression wasn't sad. It was exhausted. I leaned in. You have no right to do this, Jessica snapped. You want to die with a smile, knowing you took everything from me? Richard didn't answer. You hate me so much you'd rather give your empire to a man who unclogged your toilet? Still nothing. She stepped closer, voice rising. He's weak, Dad. He doesn't belong in our world. He's not even one of us. He can barely dress himself. This is humiliating. Richard finally moved, just leaned forward. You made your choice, he said, voice cold. You left him while I was still alive. So what? She hissed. You were already halfway in the grave. He held up a hand, cutting her off. And yet I lived long enough to rewrite the will. She froze. Her usually composed face twisted into something like panic. He went on, slower now. You thought you could outsmart me, have your freedom, keep the fortune, erase the consequences. But Jessica, there are consequences. You've always treated love as leverage. And Daniel? He never asked me for anything. Not a dime. Never insulted me, even when I tried to push him away. Jessica backed up a step. Her expression was unreadable now. Fury tangled with confusion. This isn't about love, she said finally. This is about punishment. No, Richard said. It's about protection. I'm protecting my legacy from you. And that was it. The video ended. I sat there a long time, the screen black, my own face faint in the glare. It wasn't satisfying. It wasn't some cinematic victory where the villain is exposed and justice rains down. No. It hurt. All of it hurt. Because deep down, I still hoped she might care that some piece of her, even a tiny one, had loved me once. But the way she spoke about me, like I was an embarrassing mistake. She hadn't lost me. She had discarded me. And now the only thing she wanted was the thing I accidentally inherited. The thing her father left me not out of spite, but out of recognition. But here's the problem Jessica didn't see coming, something I finally understood in that dark, cold room. She hadn't just lost the money. She'd lost the one person who might have defended her, because there was something else in the folders I hadn't noticed before, hidden behind the legal documents, the emails and the property deeds. A medical report. A sealed envelope marked private, to be read after death. Inside was a final instruction from Richard, one that didn't just disqualify Jessica from the inheritance. It hinted she might have done more than manipulate and lie. It hinted she might have helped speed things up. I don't know how long I sat there holding that envelope. I didn't open it right away. My fingers trembled around the edges, like the thing might bite if I looked inside. I've never been good with mysteries. I'm the kind who Googles spoilers halfway through a movie to ease the tension. But this wasn't a plot twist I'd been waiting for. This was real, and Richard's initials were on the seal. It wasn't long or dramatic, unlike the video. Just a one-page note, neatly written in block letters. Richard's penmanship looked sharp, almost mechanical, as if every word had been measured twice and carved in with a blade. If this reaches you, Daniel, I am dead, and you've chosen not to give in to Jessica. Good. You always had more backbone than she gave you credit for. I'm not writing this as a confession. I'm writing it because I believe, deep down, I won't die by nature's hand alone. I know my daughter. I know what she's capable of when she's desperate. That line, that one, it ran ice through my veins. I have no proof, only instinct. I was healthy before the retreat. My doctors confirmed it. But after the weekend, she visited. Something changed. Chest pains, random dizziness. She offered me a new tea, said it was part of a cleanse. I never drank it again after I threw up the first night. Still, I told no one. What kind of father suspects his own daughter of trying to speed up an inheritance? But Daniel, if you're reading this, and I didn't go peacefully, promise me one thing. Don't let her walk away untouched. I set the paper down and stared at the wood grain of the desk for a long time. It wasn't an accusation legally or officially, just suspicion. A whisper from a man who spent a lifetime calculating people. I wanted to tell myself it was paranoia, that Richard, for all his brilliance, let grief distort his judgment. But my gut said otherwise. The memory of Jessica in that video, hissing about taking everything, her obsession with the claws, the desperation in her eyes every time she showed up, feigning remorse, it all started to form a pattern. And then I remembered the security logs. Horace had briefly shown me the server terminal, just a footnote in the tour. But those logs recorded who entered which rooms and when. I rushed back downstairs and asked if I could access them again. He hesitated, but when I showed him the letter, his expression hardened, and he simply nodded. We pulled the archive for the weekend Richard mentioned. Jessica entered the kitchen 6 times, the guest room twice, the library once, and Richard's private quarters, 7 entries, all between midnight and 4 a.m. 7. When I asked how often guests typically had access to that space, Horace said flatly, "Never, unless invited." And that was the point. I knew Richard. He didn't invite Jessica into that room at midnight, let alone 7 times. Still, it wasn't proof. Not enough for the police, not enough for a lawsuit. But it was enough for me. Enough to understand that everything she'd done since the funeral wasn't about loss or grief. It was fear. Not fear of losing money, but fear that I'd discover she might have had a hand in how quickly it arrived. It was fear wearing perfume, lipstick, and a tight smile. So I made a choice. I called her. She picked up on the first ring, breathless, like she'd been staring at the phone for hours. "Daniel, I found the footage," I said. "The one from the library, and the letter." Silence. I let it hang. Then, softly, she said, "You're not supposed to have that." "No," I said, "I'm not. Just like you weren't supposed to be in his room 7 times after midnight." She exhaled sharply. "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying, and so do you." Another pause. Then, carefully, with that same twisted control she always used when cornered, she asked, "What do you want?" It was the first time she didn't pretend innocence, and in that moment I realized something. Jessica didn't believe in guilt, or shame, or family. She believed in leverage, so I gave her none. "Nothing," I said. "I want nothing from you. And I'm going to give you nothing back. No money, no silence, no protection. You'll spend the next year wondering if I'll go to the police. You'll keep your hair perfect and your smile polished, but you'll always flinch when the doorbell rings." Her voice broke then. For real. "Daniel." But I hung up. I had never felt stronger in my life, and I wasn't done, because Richard hadn't just given me an inheritance. He'd given me a sword. I never planned to be a millionaire. I never imagined I'd be standing in a courtroom 6 months after my wife left me, listening to lawyers argue about tea bags, security logs, and will clauses. I certainly didn't think I'd be the one standing still, while Jessica always composed, honest, so perfect. Finally fell apart in front of a judge, a jury, and a silent gallery. But life, as Richard would say, has an exquisite taste for irony. I didn't go to the police right after that call. I took my time, did what Jessica never expected me to do. I moved carefully. I let her think I was bluffing. I let her panic quietly in her glass condo with her wine and spreadsheets. And while she watched the phone like a grenade with a jittery pin, I started building a case. I hired Richard's own private investigator, a man who'd worked for the Whitmore family for years. Turns out he already had suspicions about Jessica. He compiled notes, dates, pharmacy receipts, financial transfers. There was a trail faint but undeniable showing that Jessica had purchased certain compounds from a boutique wellness shop known for cleansing powders. The same ones Richard consumed and then abruptly stopped. Once we turned it over to the estate attorneys, the machine came to life. Quietly. Quickly. Jessica was served with formal accusations of attempted tampering with a trust, destruction of protected legal documents, and interference with a will. It didn't go criminal. We weren't trying to convict her. But it did go to civil court. And in that courtroom, the full weight of Richard Whitmore's empire crushed whatever hope Jessica had left. The clause held. She walked in thinking she could challenge it. She walked out with nothing. Not a dime. The judge upheld the trust structure, the addendum, the footage, and even Richard's handwritten statement. Jessica's remaining stake was frozen and then legally redirected, not to me, but to a slate of charities Richard had named as alternates, in case of moral compromise within the family. She tried to fight, appealed twice. But each time, the court sided with the evidence, with the old man's voice from the grave, with a broken husband who had stayed quiet long enough. And me? I didn't rush out to buy a yacht, didn't move to Paris or hire a chef. I moved to a modest place by a lake upstate, adopted 2 senior dogs from Captain Pickles' sanctuary, and started volunteering there once a week. Funny how one clause written out of spite became the only peaceful place I know. I learned things I never thought I would. How to file estate taxes, how to trust again slowly, how to sleep without checking my phone at 2 a.m., wondering if she was texting someone else. People ask if I'm angry, if I miss her. And the truth is, I don't know. I don't miss the lies. I don't miss the weight of her expectations. but sometimes I miss who I thought she was. That version of Jessica I used to imagine still loved me somewhere, beneath all the ambition and contempt. But missing a ghost isn't the same as wanting it back. Not long ago I got a letter, handwritten, messy, unsigned. No return address. Just one sentence inside. "You ruined everything. I didn't keep it. I let the dogs tear it up, because she's wrong. I didn't ruin everything. I saved what was left of me. And that was worth far more than $250 million.